Hey there, magical experimenters. Taylor Ellwood here. And today I'm going to be focusing on the topic of why magic doesn't always work, which is occasional question I get. Somebody will do a magical working and, they're shooting for a specific result and they've gathered all the requirements together and everything else, all the required components. They got the goat the goat skin, they got the special knife and or whatever else. I know I'm having a little fun here. But seriously, they did all that. They did the ritual, they said the right words, everything else, and the result didn't manifest. How frustrating is that? It's really frustrating. Now, if you're watching this video and for the first time and you're not subscribed, click the little subscribe button below and then click the notification bell. So, why magic always work? Well, let's consider something here very important. When we're doing a magical working to manifest a result, we have a few things we have to factor in as to why magic doesn't always seem to work. One, the magic could be working, but it may be working on its own timetable in a way that you didn't expect. I mean, how many of you have done a magical working where you did end up getting the result you wanted, but it happened in a way you didn't expect, at a time that you didn't expect? I've been there, done that. I'm sure you have too. Sometimes you'll do a magical working and, magic works its way through the universe. It manifests what you need, but it manifests it in a way you don't expect. And I think a lot of times, people don't anticipate that. They want things to happen at a certain time, at a certain place. They've got expectations that they build in, and we're going to come back to the expectations piece in a moment. And so what ends up happening then is they get surprised when it manifests in a way they didn't expect because they had this tunnel vision about things. So sometimes your magic works, it just may not work on the timeline that you have in mind. Keep that in mind. But lest someone say, well, Taylor, geez, that's a convenient excuse. No, I'm not saying that always happens. I'm saying sometimes it happens. And I will say this: the best way to observe if that's happening or not is keep track of what is going on in your life. Because if you have a specific result you're shooting for and you want to see it manifest, and it doesn't manifest quite the way you expect, but there are nonetheless things happening that are pushing it along toward manifesting, that's an indicator. This is why you want to track your magical work, because when you know what you've done and you know what you're shooting for, you want to keep track of it. And how do you keep track of it? Well, keep a careful record of what is actually happening. Note when you did the magical working, what you did with the magical working. Write down any mundane actions that you're taking as well in relationship to that magical working, if you're taking mundane actions, and then pay attention to what is actually manifesting in your life that might be relevant to that, albeit in a way that you may not expect. Nonetheless, sometimes we don't have things manifest the way that we want. And so we have to figure out, well, why is that? Well, that's where I take a troubleshooting approach to my magical work. The way that I like to approach things is I like to look at it first by examining the result. How well did I define the result? Did I take the time to outline the result and describe what it was I was shooting for, and how specific and well defined is that result? Let's say I like to use this a lot, but it's just it's an easy example. Let's say you're trying to do job magic to get a job. If your result is something as simple as I want a job, then simply any job will do. You get a job at a fast food restaurant, and well, that filled the criteria. That may not be the job you wanted, but you got a job that worked. If on the other hand you define a job in relationship to how much money you'd like to make, if you get benefits or not, what type of coworkers you work with, what kind of activities you're doing, things like that, it gives you something much more measurable, and it's easier to determine if what you're doing is actually working or not, because you actually have something specific you're shooting for. The other thing that I like to look at is how much are my preconceptions, my stresses and expectations factoring into this. And what I mean by that is this. When you do a magical working, if you have a set expectation around how something should manifest in your life, how it ought to show up, you're limiting the field of probabilities around those expectations. They might say, well, isn't that a good thing? Yes and no. On the one hand, it can be a good thing because you are being very specific about what you're looking for. And you have a set idea as to how it ought to manifest. But it can also be too limiting because you're negating the possibility of the magic manifesting in ways that you might not expect, but that gets you the result you want. So you want to keep that in mind, because sometimes you're going to do a magical working and you want to leave a little bit of room for variability, for things to occur in a way that you didn't expect. Case in point, I did a multiple sigil working a while back, and one of the things that I wanted was for me to get some more recognition for my work, as a magician, and I got a couple podcast interviews within a month. Cool. Thought that was awesome, but I was hoping for more. And I did this back in July. Well, what I found is that since that time, that working has picked up steam, because I've basically gotten interviewed about at least once a month, and then in this last month in particular, a number of interviews have come in. And what I've also noticed is that my work has just been getting more recognized in general. I've had people commenting more, or approaching me more, or discussing things more about my work. It just took some time to build up steam. Now, if I was just solely basing it on the fact that I got a couple podcast interviews in the first month, then, hey, great. I did get the result I wanted. But if we look at the fact that this was ultimately a long-term result where there was going to be more recognition and things were going to pick up steam even more, and keep in mind that I haven't released a book since August, the end of August, and it's now February, so it's about 6 months since I've released a book. Um, Basically that magic has picked up steam. It hasn't been because of anything I've been doing per se, beyond the fact that I've been writing my blog posts, creating videos, all the stuff I normally do anyway. It's nothing special. So, I left some wiggle room there. I wanted to get some recognition. I was happy with the initial result, but I was also open to further things, and I've had that happen. I had a Reddit interview, or a Reddit I am a thing going on recently, a couple of interviews, all that other good stuff. So I just share that with you because it's a good example of where you might have something manifest a bit later down the line, but also where you don't want your expectations to get so streamlined that you don't see the possibilities. Like, I never would have thought of a Reddit I am a as an example. I'm an occult author type thing. I wouldn't have thought of that as an example, but it came through. Um, I wouldn't have had some of the other opportunities that came through. They wouldn't have necessarily fit the narrow criteria that I was looking for, but nonetheless, it worked out. So be aware of your expectations and how those factor in, and whether or not those get in the way. I mentioned stresses earlier. So by stresses, I mean environmental impacts, things that are going to affect your magic in a way that you um, might need to be aware of. Like, what's going on up here mentally and emotionally that could be affecting your magical work. Is there some part of you that's resistant to what you want? Is there some part of you that is sabotaging what you want? These are things to pay attention to, because they can get in the way. Um, Are there unknown variables that you're not aware of that could be coming into play? Again, these are things that you want to try and identify as quickly as possible. Have you factored in what you're also competing against in regards to your result? Like, going back to the job example, if you're doing job magic, you are competing against everybody else that is looking for that job as well. How do you factor that into your magic working? Are you even factoring that in? These are all things to consider when it comes to troubleshooting your magic. Now, one thing I'm going to mention, I actually have a book out called How to Troubleshoot Your Magic, which I recommend, and the link is in the show notes for this video. And I also have a class where I include a few things that weren't included in the book that also covers this. So, like, if you're wondering, like, why isn't my magic working? I'm going to point those to you as resources because those could be helpful for you as another way of figuring out some of these things. And I go into more detail there. So check those out. But the other thing I want you to consider about why, sometimes your magic isn't necessarily working the way that you thought it would is maybe you're not understanding a specific piece of the process that you're working through. Maybe there's something missing in what you're trying to accomplish. One of the reasons why I define my result is that when I define my result, I also define the process. What I mean by that is that if I've defined I want X, Y, and Z, then I can say, okay, well, what do I need to do to actually start accomplishing that? And I start looking at things like, okay, what are the mundane actions I need to be doing, i.e., the non-occult actions, and then I look at the occult actions, and I ask myself, how is this occult action going to interface and connect with the mundane actions, and what is it I specifically need to do? Do I need to be working with specific spirits? Do I need to be um, doing some form of practical magic where I'm not working with a spirit, things like that. All of these things can be sequenced together in order to help you create a process that you can track and that allows you to understand what you're doing. But let's say you're just doing a magic spell out of a book and you don't have clue on how that magic spell really connects with the world around you or how it's going to do what you're doing. You're operating in a blind spot. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know how what you're doing is going to help you accomplish what you're going for. And if you don't know that, it makes it very hard for you to figure out why it isn't working. You have to start taking it apart and figure out, well, what are the specific principles of magic that are involved? What are the specific things that I'm trying to accomplish? What are How is this actually supposed to be interfacing with the possibilities that I'm trying to manifest into reality? I think a lot of times when people do magical work, they have this notion of, I'll just do the magical working. I don't necessarily need to know how it works. I just do it and put it out there and boom, there you go. And I think that's an erroneous perspective to take to magical work. Um, Despite the argument that some people might make that magic is acausal, I have found it to rather be causal. And what I mean by acausal versus causal is people would say acausal, there's no real connection between it. It just, you do the magical working and then stuff happens. But you don't really understand how it all connects together. I would say there's always a causal link, though. Nothing else. The causal link is you yourself. You want this result. You want to manifest it. You are the causal link, if nothing else. But your actions should also be a causal link. If you know you have this result that you want to accomplish, and you know that there are specific things you need to do to get that result, there's your causal link. Using a bit of logic and rationality in how you approach your magical work can necessarily help you become a better magician because it allows you to start taking apart what you're doing, figuring out what is working and what isn't, and then making changes to what isn't working. And that's a huge part of what I teach when it comes to troubleshooting your magic. So that's my thoughts on this question. I wanted to share that because someone had asked that a little while back, and I like to always answer these questions. I don't always get to them as quickly as possible because I'm creating video content or stuff like that, but nonetheless, I am answering these questions. And as I said before, check out the book and or the video class where I go into much further detail with this stuff. Thank you guys for watching and see you next week.